Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast. I've got Aaron Lowry here. He corrected me. This is our fifth podcast, not our fourth podcast. So, and we're going to get right into treasure hunts because you were talking about how it almost is like the demiurge. You were talking about like the demiurge kind of like treasure hunt type of thing where we're like stuck in this world and we're offered treasure in this desire sense, but then the desired thing like turns out not to be actually that gold. Is that what you were saying?
I think there's an aspect of that, but it wasn't exactly what I was aiming at because, I think if we maintain something like an optimal posture towards our experience of reality, it's one where we're integrating feedback through all kinds of sensory type of interfaces and informational landscapes, all these sorts of things in different contexts. And there are no really like empirically sound places that you can just reach out and constantly touch and be like, this tells me where I am in relationship to everything else. Right? Like that's not we don't have real oracles in that sense that kind of give us that sort of empiricism. Instead, it's kind of like you can frame the world more or less structurally. Based on principles and all these sorts of things. You can impose some sort of constraints and principles into the world, right? And those can sort of define then the way that you perceive how the world works, how it can work, and what can and can't be. But I actually think what's a better posture is one that's driven by more like curiosity or imagination. And it's a harder thing to kind of walk that path because it's not so propositionally bounded. And you have to kind of maintain a higher level of openness just in general because you have to allow a bunch of new information to be potentially viable or have some kind of relevance or soundness, at least if it kind of resonates, right? Like that's a thing you sort of have to tune for, I think, in your personal experience is like when you encounter really novel information, does it have some sort of resonance where it maybe triangulates with other things that are already in your map? Because that might be something like justification to pursue the impulse to dive deeper down that rabbit hole. Because
a network of ideas.
Yeah. I mean, if it doesn't connect to anything, right? If you just encounter a new idea and you do some cursory overview of it, and it would be a good example. So at the limits of some of our observable, definable, measurable kind of quantifiable realm is, deep space, right? Like black holes, black energy, dark matter, dark whatever, right? And these things, our perspective of them, our relationship towards them have changed and been reframed at different periods of time by, I guess, different formal structures of thinking about it, right? You have classical physics is one way to approach it, and then quantum physics offers some different kind of insights and perspectives about what these things might be, because we don't really know enough about them to we're trying to gauge the effects that they're having secondarily or multi-orders. And it's interesting to note that if you kind of start backtracking back through the lineage of our different spacecraft and our different telescope systems, that it's still changing every time we produce a higher resolution telescope or a better system to observe these systems, right? And then our new observations generally don't mesh well with our old data sets. Like there's a lot of things that don't layer cleanly at the different resolutions as we're observing these things. And so you can pick different kind of frames.
You lost me there. What did you mean by that?
So if you go look at I'm going to get some of the names wrong. There are, say, Hubble, I think, observatory kind of data metrics that go back to, I don't know, probably 20 or 30 years, maybe a little longer. And, to compare those with maybe the most recent thing would be the James Webb telescope, right? And there are multiple generations of different devices between those two. And each one, like some of them actually measure different ranges of frequencies of light or different kinds of, um, electromagnetic signals. Sometimes we're able to integrate new things into our telescopes to observe this stuff, right? And that allows us to actually bring in totally different layers of information, right, that weren't in the previous data sets because we just didn't have any ways to observe or measure them. And then we start to get maybe a little bit more complete picture, but it won't mesh with the earlier picture very well at all. Like even the measurements will be very vastly different.
Why?
And that probably, I think it mostly represents how like the scale that we're trying to measure these things at, right? Like tremendous distances across and between us and these things, and we're dependent on basically light signatures and different frequency wave signatures to observe them, and they're not very high resolution based off of what we know to observe at this point.
Okay.
So I don't want to go down we could go down kind of a rabbit trail there, right? But at some point it's like, well, which data set are you going to start using if you're going to start building things for maybe even the next generation? Like, obviously, it makes sense to use whatever's the most recent data we have that seems to be the most complete data set, right? But where we point our new technology when we build the next system is going to depend on like what we're looking for, what we think we might find and where we might find it and how we would look for it. And different people might have different ideas, or even from one person might have different ideas from different perspectives about which direction that could go, right? And eventually, say from a pragmatic standpoint, you're going to have to, if you're going to build or do or produce anything that's going to be that next generation, you have to choose a direction, right? That you're going to deploy your efforts and your resources to, try to achieve a certain objective, whether it's higher resolution measurements of things we've already measured, whether it's new sensory integration so that we can measure things we haven't measured before. And if it's things like that, what do we look for and why? And, there, I think imagination plays a big role, because what we'll look for, it will be bounded by what we think could be there. And so that's... and
this is related to the treasure hunt, because basically we're going and trying to find treasure because we desire things. We want to achieve things, and our measurement to know where the treasure is essentially all messed up, because they're not really messed up, but it's like inaccurate for whatever we want to find. Is that right?
Well, I think there's kind of a sense where what we began with before we started recording, right, was something like, there does seem to be an aspect of our experience that is as humans, that is the experience of being in a treasure hunt. And we don't know exactly all the things that can be found. We kind of gather clues as we go, right? And I observed this with my children doing Easter egg hunts when, especially when they were young, but it doesn't go away, is there can be treasures placed in fairly obvious places, sometimes places that are so obvious that they'll go unnoticed. And I'll watch them go around the yard and pass this, highly visible egg 3 or 4 times, both of them, and not see it, right? And they're actually looking for Easter eggs when they're out there, so it's not like it's not in their relevance realization at all. Easter eggs are part of their salience landscape at that moment, right? And so they're looking for them. They'll still miss some of them, right? And not just like tricky hidden ones. Like sometimes they're the ones that are just out in the open because they think they're all going to be tricky hidden places.
Interesting.
The tendency is to be like turning over rocks and like peeking behind, bushes or whatever, right? So I do think that there's an aspect of say let's use these in sort of the Vervaekian terms, right? Like the things that will be part of our salience landscape and actually attract our relevance realization are to some degree dependent on what we think can be.
Yeah.
You know,
You can't be surprised.
yeah, like the more structured you perceive the world
Yeah.
to be, and the more you think you know about how you think it works, the less likely you are to see things that contradict that,
Yeah.
right? Or to be able to
Which
integrate
is a
feedback from
non-starter.
things.
Which is like a non-starter for most people, I would say. Like what you just said there is just like so far beyond what most people will accept as true. The fact that we don't know what's going on and that humility is the not like a false humility, because false humility is commonly used in those circumstances. It's like so far away from what people know to be true. But then I think through old age, I think it's sort of suffered out of us because the suffering just gets so intense that we can't pretend like we know something anymore. Although some people go to their death with that, right?
There's, I think, a pretty wide spectrum of experience on that.
Yeah.
Like it's very, I don't think it's uncommon for people to kind of ossify
Yeah.
and their belief
Yeah.
structures in ways that, you know, can even close off, say, the progress of technology within the world and its impact on them, right? It's like if you just decided to kind of, if you say lived in an environment where you had the capacity to either accept or reject cell phone technology 25
Yeah.
years ago, and you
Yeah.
decided to reject it, and there are people like this if you go to places like
Yeah.
rural Wyoming up here north of us, and you know, in certain kinds of communities where their network of dependent relationships, right, that they needed to be able to run their life, whether, you know, maybe they did local sand and gravel, or maybe they're a meat packer, right? Maybe they're a guide service, right? Something like this, right? And they can do their entire business word of mouth. They're not having to like interact with the internet to and the like the outside world. Like they're still pretty like you could localize your world by rejecting certain types of technologies.
Yeah.
You could
Yeah.
you can limit the potential to say operate or compete in different sectors of the economy, right? Based on your willingness to adopt new technology, right?
This is the hardest thing for me because we were talking about this on Twitter, is that it's such an interesting case where, and I'll share it for the listeners, is basically like when I first started using AI about 2 years ago, about 6 months in, I realized I could, if the calls were being recorded, I could have notes. So I wouldn't need to take notes anymore. So I could walk around in Buenos Aires, walking around and have the AI take the notes and on the call out in nature or whatever. And like that represented a fundamental shift where I was like, okay, well, I can go in Patagonia in like a year. And like and then since then I got into vibe engineering, AI generated coding, and now I've got my little Raspberry Pi, which is part of the reason I would love to talk to you as well, is to figure out what the kind of things I can do with that. But I'm now getting into the kernel of truth about how computers work, and that is a very addictive process. So I'm now becoming dependent on the AI in a way that's making me actually on the computer more, which is the opposite of where I was going a year and a half ago. I do think that voice is coming, and I do think that once that happens, it's actually my dad told me something really great on Sunday, which is that voice is imprecise. So even with all the good AI stuff that it now does with the transcription and everything like that, still too imprecise to operate at the command line, and the command line needs to be in text because that's the text to the assembly, right? And that's like has to be exactly the way, and that's why it is a really interesting experience. But so it's all like now I'm on the computer a lot more. And you had mentioned that that's very common, and I agree with you that the last, since the 60s, the promise of the technology of the computer is that we won't need to be on the computer all the time because we'll be more productive. So we'll spend more time with our family and our friends and at leisure and all these things, which is not the case. Kind of. That part I feel like goes back to what we were just talking about like, well, what community, right? Because the Amish, they all decide what technology they're using. And so yeah, what do you think about that?
I think that, yes, there's like this persistent promise of all kinds of technologies, and really, like, if we're using them and integrating them, it's because they're working somehow. Like, that's actually, we tend to be pretty pragmatic in that way, unless there's some sort of, authoritarian force or something kind of tyrannical forcing something down,
Yeah.
top down, and that almost never works at all. Like, you can find some examples of those kinds of things. Maybe blockchain forks are sometimes an example of something like that, right? Somebody tries to impose a certain ideological structure, and you get two different node
Yeah.
versions or different node
ETH Classic,
softwares, right? And then
ETH
you've got,
Classic versus Ethereum.
yeah, a good example. Many others. So, that's I think. Let me think. Where do I want to go with that? Restate the question again, real quick for me.
Sure.
I want to. I
So
want to keep
basically,
this
how? Yeah,
concise and not
and I
get too
threw a
digressive.
lot of
Yeah. I'm trying to
yeah.
tie a few things in, but I want to keep it close.
Sure. So basically, this AI is coming, and I am now spending way more time on the computer. I thought it would be less on the computer. In 5 years, where am I going to be?
Yeah, so I think that there are a number of forces that actually influence this that don't have anything to do with the technology either.
Ooh.
So the promise of productivity has actually been realized, generally speaking,
Yeah.
by computers and the connectivity offered by the internet, and some of the potential that's been tapped through those. But what tends to happen
Interesting.
is that the pressure to continue to keep elevating production
Yeah.
doesn't dissipate, right? So,
Yeah. Interesting.
that I think probably primarily trickles down from our monetary policy.
Ancestral environment. Oh
I would
no.
say
Okay.
monetary
Interesting.
policy,
Mm-hmm,
in a
mm-hmm,
lot of
mm-hmm,
ways,
mm-hmm.
at least at a more practical level, because yeah, I think you can kind of scale that out all the way into things like a fundamental perception of scarcity, right? Like there's a whole different conversation to kind of tap into, is the scarcity versus abundance kind of fundamental framing. And, I think maybe tie that back in, right? Because it does relate to what we were talking about before with the treasures and where you look, right? It's like the
Yeah.
solutions
Interesting.
that we tend to build, right? Because you're looking forward and trying to project something that's like, okay, here's a trend, right? Where actually the thing that was promised is not the thing that I'm experiencing so far, right? And like, if I keep plotting this out, it keeps going further in the direction I don't want to go. So is there a reason to think that that's going to correct for somehow? Or is it actually going to be necessary to change my course heading if I'm going to end up where I want to be?
Yeah.
Right? And that's a very real question, right? And and I'm not sure that we
Well,
have enough information to answer it, because there are
yeah.
so many things going on. But I think if you think about it and frame it in kind of the most maybe objective or constructive ways you can manage, right? Be maybe a little bit detached from what it is, or maybe your current heading, right? As a thing that's like needs to stay the same. Back off far enough to say, like, is it actually the question that I need to change heading? Or if I keep pursuing this thing, is there going to be some sort of a shift in my capacity to manage it, or a transition in the capacity of the technology, whether it's software or say voice
Mhm.
integration, whatever that level is, right? That's going to leapfrog it up to this point where all of a sudden it's going to shift the dynamics, and I'm going to start spending a lot less time. So like those are
And I think
unknowns.
voice is that. I think voice is that.
Voice is a powerful thing for sure. So I think to touch on that, the question is going to be something like, do you depend on some sort of external service to parse all of that voice and to store all
Yeah.
your messages and all of that? or are you going to do it yourself at the edge on your own hardware and that sort of thing? Because
wait. Sorry, I got it. So, are you using the coding agents inside the command line terminal?
am I?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No, I'm not.
So, this is it feels like a video game, and so it feels addictive, and it feels like, but it gets to the nature of addiction, which goes back to that sort of treasure hunt thing we were talking about earlier. But then there's the productive addiction, which is, there's very many cases, right? Because it all goes back to that scarcity thing and how to value what you just said. And I think you're right on the monetary policy doing that. But the coding agents are really interesting because they are, now I remember why I interrupted you. So they're not open source except for one. There's one open source one called Open Code. And I interviewed the founder a few days ago about that one. Gemini, Claude, and Codex are the people competing. They're all foundational labs. I think they're basically have forgotten everything else and are just now putting all of their, I mean, not everything else, but forgot everything else has now become much, much lower in the priority stack than these coding agents. And I think Google is going to introduce one that will make me question about AGI. I might be wrong on that, but Codex is now starting to make me question about AGI because it is so powerful. It just works. I am building things that I had never thought possible before. And it's kind of crazy. I don't want to get to the last like 30 minutes or 40 minutes or so. I want to talk about the things that I can build with this thing. But just like, I want to hear like what the response to that, because of the dependency issue, because of the open source, open code, like what you just described. I want that, not having dependencies on these guys. And but given the speed at which they're operating, because I always want to use the best one, right? Because then it will solve the most challenging coding problems that I run into, and not actually writing any of the code myself. I question that. But yeah, what do you think?
Well, I think probably touching on some of the more significant practical issues that are facing, I don't know, anyone that's trying to integrate this kind of technology functionally. You know, I don't know that everybody's thinking about it. Most people aren't thinking about it and addressing it. I don't think with a lot of there's a lot of people that express a lot of care about and concern about AI.
Yep.
I don't
But it's all disordered.
Like, I don't see a lot of concern about, it's not none, but like very little of it is really kind of expressed in the terms of the exposure vector that it creates into your personal life and the capacity and willingness of third-party systems to either monetize or manipulate data based off of profiles like that. That's pretty historically well established, I think. So, like, I don't know how you use those systems with a high degree of trust without kind of ignoring that. And that's problematic if you worry about trust, I guess, or if you're conscious of it. But there's a flip side, right? And for sure, there's an aspect of this that is convenience related too, because the overhead required to set up and manage all your own hardware, right? Like there are dependencies, no matter which direction they go. You're just, if you're cognizant of it, then you're choosing which ones maybe you're leaning on. You can spend some capital and put in some hardware, and then maybe you have multiple network connections, so you've got some redundancy and backup, like at least Starlink behind your
interesting.
Whatever your hard local cable is, right? Hopefully fiber or something like that. and then that's your external connection, and then you got to manage your own internal networks, and you can do that in different ways between are you integrating smart home devices? Do you want them to have any kind of external connectivity capacities, or like how do you manage all these things, and how much sovereignty do you want over your digital footprint or your digital life, right, in a sense, or how much are you either, I guess, maybe willingly or unwillingly extending that onto some other service, right, externally, right? Because that's actually what happens when we don't run all that stuff. Like, AWS goes down and all of a sudden a bunch of services stop working for a bunch of people everywhere. Like, I didn't happen to notice it at my home, but there's reasons for that. And, like,
so without sharing anything you don't want to share, like, this is a Raspberry Pi question, which is what do you have set up for your local, like, is all your computation local?
Not 100%. There are things that I use, cloud services for convenience, for sure. But, things like local security and all that, like I run Home Assistant for home stuff, very minimal automation or stuff like that at home, but that's part of it, right? Just don't get heavily dependent on digitally connected devices to do all these kinds of things.
Okay, that's really cool.
Don't integrate a bunch of smart home things into your home.
Well, but you can now, right? This is what I'm thinking. So I had a conversation with a few people and the AI yesterday, is that basically I think what I want to start with, because I was asking, like, well, what should I build? Of all the hardware things, what should I build? Well, it's just like how much time supplies, and like it's like everything in the physical world. Now I look at the physical world very differently. Like, my door is stuck for the elevator, and I was thinking, like, holy shit, what would it take to go recreate that door? Like, and then the parts probably went out. This place was built in the 60s, and like it's Argentina, and like maybe the Argentine systems might actually be more anti-fragile than the US systems, so now, okay, so that was a tangent. So all the things I could build, and I'm thinking sensors, those are the things that I can kind of like start to, and I don't really have any goal. There's the building hardware, because it's interesting, and it's the same thing of like the reality, like how close can I get to reality, what reality really is, and software does seem realistic or does tie us to reality, but hardware seems like it definitely ties us to reality. So that's the main goal, but also just like creating interesting stuff. And like, there's a little bit of vague fear, anxiety, but I think it's mostly from other people about like that the jobs are going away, so we have to pivot into hardware. I know that's definitely motivating a lot of people. What do you think about sensors? Do you think that's the right one? Anything because you've been building a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways I'm working from the other side oftentimes in,
mechanical.
Yeah, because and even in the companies that I've had, in the projects that I've done that were digitally integrated systems, I've done exclusively with my partner Mike, right?
Yeah.
In those businesses, and he's the one that's deeply ingrained on the hardware side and software, hardware, software, and the firmware integration, where I'm more on actually the physical devices and the deployment, kind of like where things are getting deployed, how they get put in, what they're doing, like how they're actually engaging on the edge, and then he's integrating that on the inside, right? So that's how we work together as a team. So, I mean, the benefit for me in a lot of ways was that I got to learn a lot about how the systems worked on the digital side, by doing all those different integration projects. An example, one of the last ones that we did a couple of years ago was an aeroponics hydration system for a growing tower, right? And so this actually uses a a high pressure mist system on the inside to water the roots, and then it'd have a timer with a pump, and then also pumps to add nutrients based off of pH balances. We're constantly just monitoring all kinds of things within and without of the enclosure.
Brilliant.
And build something like that. So he would be the one that's actually writing the code and making that happen on the digital side, and I'd be the one figuring out what sensors we're using, where we're putting them, and what we need them to do, right? And then oftentimes the logic, right, of how how we need to actually interface that between the user and the however it's deployed.
Okay, that's brilliant. So that's what I want to do. I think that's what I think now. I want to, rather than me just tinkering, it would be more fun to go and find something like that I could sell to somebody in Argentina. What, from all the things that you built, what were the most commercially viable?
One of the challenges that I've had is that I tend to produce things that appeal to smaller markets of people. That's an unfortunate thing. It tends to be I think, I've analyzed this because I'm not producing products right now. So I look back at the things I've done and, why they were or weren't successful in different ways. And generally the case has been that they've been very successful within a select group of people, but not a mass market, like solving smaller problems, doing them well, or something like principles costing us in the deployment, right? So the anti-theft GPS system that we had, we refused to sell people's data. And, that meant that you actually had to sell people devices and have them pay for a service.
Oh, that's interesting.
Which means that you have to compete with everyone who's giving away devices and giving away service and then monetizing people's data.
So this goes back to the conversation we were talking about earlier, because I think even though it might not have been commercially viable in the past, it may be hard to commercially viable. I think the groundswell of people who now distrust the right people to distrust is now shifting. What do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree?
I do think that, I guess my suspicion is that there will continue to be an increased shift that direction. The downside of that is that I think it does reflect eroding trust across institutions and society in general, because the reason that, say one of the trust, a high degree of trust allows us to even say it affords the environment where these kind of systems can even exist that we've had, where people will contribute so much personal information to a platform that's free to use, right? And it gives them some value in exchange for the time they spend on it, but actually the value is being extracted by the platform itself and monetized, right? And eventually, like as this has grown and gone on, like I think actually it's morphed into something that's directly influencing people's attention and extracting it and exploiting it. But
yes, that is happening.
That's a different thing a little bit. So I think to kind of boil that down, like I think there is a thing where like it's hard to figure out how to, let's say you're conscientious and principled and you want to build something that's, say, pragmatically has utility. People are going to benefit from using it. And you're maybe even going to build it so well that they only have to buy one ever. Right? So it's not planned obsolescence, and it's not a lifetime of subscription services and all of that, right?
Yeah.
You have to charge more for that, right?
Yeah.
Like the upfront entry costs are just going to be prohibitive for like 95% of the market oftentimes, right? Because the point to where the existing landscape has been eroded is all based on leveraging people's information, data, or long-term tying them into some sort of a SaaS or subscription model.
So okay, but that feels like it's breaking now. Let me share my knowledge from using these tools. So I've now successfully been able to remove 2 SaaS products from my life. One is called Descript for transcriptions, which are really easy, which I'm now doing locally on my computer, so no even API call anymore, which is really exciting. I'm gonna do OCR DeepSeek, the Chinese model.
Yep.
Just released an OCR model that I can run on my computer.
Very remarkable, like image based, right? Yeah,
image based, and that's on my computer locally, no call to either China or the United States.
Crazy
and
that the
other one
Chinese have been embracing open source this way. Crazy. Go on.
Has been breaking my mind to try to figure out why. I think I have a good answer as why. But the other one is I wanted to deploy things, and so I got a server on DigitalOcean, and because of the particularities of the vibe coding matrix, I had to put everything on a Docker. So I put like 7 websites on a Docker container in order to containerize them, all built with AI. I didn't write a line of code, but I all got them up there. But because of those particularities, I didn't do it efficiently. And so DigitalOcean was charging me like 40 USD a month. It started at like 15 and then ended up at 40 USD a month. And so then I got my Raspberry Pi, and then most of the websites I no longer use because I switched to a different SaaS. And then the one website I still do use, I put that on my Raspberry Pi now. So I've now removed those from my life, and I'm not going to stop. Like it feels like I'm just going to continue to remove SaaS products from my life, and I'm not the only one. So I think that SaaS mindset might be breaking, not for mainstream, but for people like you. But how do we get the coding agent open source with no dependence on that one?
I mean, I think that's kind of the thing where you just kind of have to wait for the tools to emerge unless you have the capacity to build them yourself. And I mean, that's the thing that's remarkable, is that they are emerging, and from whence they're emerging, because most of the players that get most of the recognition on, are here in the States, let's say, right, from our perspective, aren't playing that game. So many of them are explicitly playing a regulatory capture game and, a closed environment kind of stack. And like, I don't know that that's necessarily widespread within user preference or even within the technology sphere. Like, there's a lot of resistance towards that, but I think the people that are headed that direction at the top of these organizations, like, they're going to continue going that direction. It's like, so Elon is the only one that has an impulse to open source anything. Mark Zuckerberg, but even
he's not. Yeah, well, but even Musk isn't open sourcing the AI. I'm pretty sure it's a proprietary foundational model, just like all the rest of them. I
thought Grok 2,
I don't know, actually,
or something like that, maybe got open sourced. I wouldn't be surprised if it was a latent kind of thing, maybe
a tiered.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. The edge is proprietary. And this gets back to why China. Why did China open source? And I did a lot of investigation on this, and it feels like China open sourced it because they're not playing the same game. They're playing the game they've been playing for 60 years, which is all the things you know how to do. How do we destroy all those businesses in the West by lowering prices, and then get all the institutional knowledge about how to build robots that build robots inside China, how to build nuclear power plants, how to get all the rare earth mining, get all the supply chains, and they've just been doing an excellent job at all of those things. And this just fits in, which is like, we don't care about the cutting edge. We know that we're not going to win that game anyway, but we're going to get 80% of the cutting edge and make it free and open source. And no one will trust a Chinese proprietary model. So no one outside of China will. So the only way they could have done it was through open source. And it was a sort of competitive move along the same lines as I just talked about, which is how to basically get this thing, put pressure on the Western companies. And the Western companies have to be proprietary. Well, maybe it's a false belief on their perspective, but they have to be proprietary because if they don't, China will copy it and do it better.
Open source is a tricky thing,
Yeah,
like,
it's hard.
um, especially with the blockchain work that Mike and I did, everything we did was
Yeah,
open source.
yeah,
And the nature of that is, really practically like, how do you get paid for it? You
yeah,
know,
exactly. Yeah,
um,
yeah,
if you're in a situation where you've got, say, academically funded research behind it or something that produces it great and wonderful.
yeah.
But if you're in the private market and say you're bootstrapping, like, um, even if you're capital funded, right? There's still no incentive for that because there's the way that the market functions is mostly through sort of like gatekeeping mechanisms, you
Can
know,
you explain more? What do you mean there?
copyright, um,
Mm.
these kind of
Yeah,
patents,
yeah.
these kinds of things, and like as someone who's done a decent amount of innovation, like I think there's value to these necessarily. Like if you remove them entirely, especially in a global economic environment like we have, like you said,
But
China would steal them instantly and produce everything cheaper than you can, and like you won't compete. So, and already our,
yeah,
protections only
yeah,
only kind of extend within the borders here anyway. And so that can
yeah.
happen regardless, especially if you start using them to produce your stuff. You send them some blueprints and you're not like now they have them, you know.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
um, yeah, there's a challenge there, and I guess the, the the simplest way to resolve it without going deep into complexities is to say that I think it grounds into the same kind of scarcity versus abundance
Mm.
fundamental.
So, okay, well, that just let's go into complexities. What that means is like, because that just goes back to the monetary theory, which the flip of what I just said about the open source. U.S. still retains total dominance of the global system because of its use of the dollar, right? But the dollar is being eroded, and there's no. It seems like the dollar has already eroded that monetary policy has already eroded the productive value of the United States, at least like 80%, 70%. Some large number of the U.S. productive value has been eroded through the last 60 years of what's been going on. Now, um, it's like, but are China and the U.S. codependent? Does how much of the US still retains the ability to do all these things based off of the fact that they still have the dollar reserve and that there is no other competitor to the dollar, and no matter how hard China tries or Russia tries, they can't fundamentally remove themselves from that, right? Like the
We're
thing I've been trying to figure out. Yeah, yep,
I'm not sure we're sure about that.
yep.
Um, I think there are explicit efforts. BRICS is an example, right?
Hmm.
Um, like there are explicit efforts to build some parallel rails. Um, and then there are different agreements coming out all the time for trade swaps between currencies and different deals for commodities
Mm-hmm.
exchanges and stuff between nations. And so, these are some of the things that actually threaten the hegemony of the dollar, I think. Um, Justifiably. I mean, they've actually been provoked, right? Like we cut Russia off
Yeah,
from SWIFT, and then
yeah,
that's actually
yeah,
when BRICS was founded, was in sort of response to that, right? So,
yeah.
that seems predictable, but maybe it wasn't. Um, there's also things to pay attention to, like precious metals, right? Precious metals have been on a pretty significant run for a while now. China's been stockpiling
Mm-hmm.
since they stopped buying
Mm.
treasury bonds, um, really, but significantly since I think like
They
2018,
stopped buying treasure bonds. Interesting. Yeah. When did
20
they start do that?
that was 2012 or 13, I think. 2014 maybe they
Okay.
dialed back
Wow. A long
treasury
time
bond
ago.
purchases.
Yeah.
So, there have been a lot of things like the dynamic between the dollar and gold is significant. There was the dollar started off backed by gold and progressively got dissociated from any sort of asset back. And so I think all of these things are worth recognizing. Obviously we have crypto markets now that represent a decent amount of value in the world, and also potential for different types of coordination and well, I mean, trustless arbitration is fundamentally kind of what you'd like to leverage in that environment, right? At least in a public.
What are you tracking in that area?
Well, I mean, you talk about the drama in Bitcoin. I think it's BIP 44 something. Anyway, I don't follow Bitcoin drama that closely, but like there's drama in Bitcoin and in node software, right? Because fundamentally your node software is where you choose your consensus, right? As a social participant in the network, that's how you choose and signal. So to be determined.
Can I run a node on my Raspberry Pi? Can I run a Bitcoin node on my Raspberry Pi?
Bitcoin node, I think you can, especially if you've got like an 8 gigabyte Pi, right, with a little more RAM. But I don't. I have an old HP rack server down in the basement, so that's where I run stuff like nodes.
Should I be buying? Okay, yeah. So I should be buying based on that. I should be buying old computers and turning them into Linux machines.
Just look for like value points in hardware, right? In availability. Depending on what your budget is kind of and your demands, and find a point that works. But I mean, there's also for compute itself, like there's some great value in things like Mac 4 Mini, right? Like those things have great
I gotta get
great value. And yeah, so it's like there's an aspect of it too where maybe it makes some sense. I mean, obviously familiarity with Linux is going to be useful all the way through, because actually, I mean, I think everything's headed that way already eventually.
What do you mean?
Microsoft's integrating Linux increasingly. It's just like there's I don't know, I mean, something like 60 to 70% of servers run Linux. Maybe it's more than that now. So it's just I mean, I think it's a question of just the architecture of the operating system, right? And it's just fundamentally superior, but it's taking over in a way where yeah. I mean, and there's so many different versions. Mike and I built a special version of Linux to run on our hardware node that we sold.
Linux. Why?
So we took a piece of hardware called a Rock Pro 64. It's made by Pine. Pretty decent little piece of hardware, especially 5-6 years ago. And we built an operating system for that was really stripped down, so it was built to run on that hardware. Mike built a custom kernel for it, and then it was totally optimized for running nodes. So basically you boot it up into the interface, and it just gave you buttons you could click to start a node for different networks in the EVM network environment.
Whoa.
And it had a compiler built into it for Solidity, so you could, and it had wallet built in. Like all these things were just like desktop icons.
Whoa, that's really interesting.
We had a chat messenger that was running Whisper, so you could send messages encrypted across Ethereum networks, peer-to-peer. That was pretty cool.
Oh man. So it's a special node software. That sounds really interesting.
Well, we ran commercial node software within that, right? So you basically had an option at the time, like the option was Geth or Parity or Mantis, which was put out by IOHK, right? So Geth was producing a Ethereum node, and Parity has their Ethereum node, and Mantis was an Ethereum Classic only node then at the time. So
Oh.
Basically when you clicked in to set up a node, you could choose which software you wanted to run.
Which software you wanted to run for all the different...
Locally, just to run that node. Like you could have one of each node running locally as well. Like we sold a version that had a 500 gig hard drive. We had one that had a terabyte hard drive in it, and they were SSD, NVMe, M.2 hard drives. So you could put a bigger hard drive in it if you wanted. But that was basically your limiting factor on how many nodes you're hosting, right? Because when you're actually hosting a full node, like at the time you could still host an Ethereum node, and now like I think all the Ethereum nodes run on cloud software, pretty much, like, or cloud hardware.
Whoa. Because the proof of stake, the move to proof of stake.
Mostly just because the state is so large, right? Like the state to host the entire. This is a problem with account-based blockchains, I think, fundamentally.
Account-based blockchains? Why?
Because the way that they store the data just naturally accumulates. It just naturally accumulates more data than UTXO or like UTXO.
So Bitcoin is not a account-based blockchain?
Correct. Yeah. Bitcoin and Cardano, both UTXO, UTXO. Ethereum-based chains are account-based.
Okay. Well, I want to go into Cardano. What you think about Cardano? Why? What UXTO? Yeah, that's
UTXO,
right. Yeah, okay.
UTXO, or EUTXO, which is extended. UTXO. It's just a formatting system for like basically how the ledger stores the data, and because it's what's the right way to say it? Like recycling content instead of like inserting all new information all the time. Like the state of the ledger doesn't grow as rapidly. So it's sort of like an engineering feature that I think is stacked against EVM chains, especially in the interest of decentralization, where at some point you'd like to be able to verify things at the edge. And I think we're working in ways to reduce the overhead for that using like ZK proofs and stuff like that. Different zero knowledge protocols are giving us better capacities to verify data at the edge without having the entire chain data stored locally. But traditionally, like you needed to have the entire ledger to be able, and like a live syncing node to be able to actually confirm transactions at across the ledger, right? Like that's not like when you use, say, a service like MetaMask on Ethereum, right? Like you create an account, you're using an API to tap into a node that actually has the data from the ledger, right? You don't have that information locally. And so there's a dependency incurred there on MetaMask. AWS needs to be up so that you can access it. And, like B, you are actually trusting them to give you, unmanipulated data from the blockchain when you look at it in their extension or their application or whatever, right? Like you're trusting that they're not changing anything between the ledger and you, because you are dependent on them for the service. And so after all, like they have to transfer that data to you. They have to, you make an API call, tell them what you want, they send it back to you, but you are kind of like just depending on or trusting that what is displayed is accurate, right? And you don't have any way to verify that yourself because you don't have a copy of the ledger.
So that's why you like Cardano.
Well, I mean, that's why I would say EU or UTXO is superior to account-based architecture, just from a scaling standpoint.
So is
just because
UTXO,
it allows people to run a node. Like I still run a Cardano node. I can run multiple different nodes locally really easily. It's because the state of the blockchain's not that big. Like I can run a node for that on a Raspberry Pi. Bitcoin, you can
Got
run a
it.
node on a Raspberry Pi, but you're
Okay.
not going to run
Got
an
it.
Ethereum node on a Raspberry Pi.
Okay. Interesting. Okay.
Maybe in
I,
2015 you could.
yeah. Interesting. There's a great meme. I hope I'm going to pick it up real quick enough. If I can, I'll meme of who are the Ethereum validators on um, validators. Jeff. Okay. Let me see if I can pull it up. I get it. Oh no, it's not on Google search results. I got it saved in my own intro. Yeah,
It's kind of a
go for
common
it.
problem too with networks like Solana, for instance, or Binance,
Interesting.
right? Like um, the validators are centralized, and so they're not the same kind of distributed, decentralized protocol,
Interesting.
but they're also doing things like really high throughput and relatively low transaction costs, which kind of reflect the fact that
Interesting.
they're being third party secured socially rather than just decentralized or in a
Wow.
distributed
Okay.
way.
So, does Cardano have low transaction fees?
Yeah, I mean, I would say comparatively, I mean, nothing
Yeah.
like Ethereum.
Yeah. Okay.
There
For
are
how
some
much
other.
they're doing.
Yeah, and Cardano is it is a decentralized consensus protocol. So
Yeah.
blocks are
Okay.
being mined. Like Mike runs a stake
Yeah.
pool. I don't run a stake pool,
Yeah.
but he runs a stake pool, and so like he can produce blocks every epoch. He's part of the pool that's producing blocks, and so are thousands of other people around the world. And you can do it, and anyone else can participate.
Okay. That's cool.
So
I like
that's, I
that.
mean, that's a significant, I mean, that's the way that Bitcoin has been as well, right? It's just
Yeah.
that
But
mining has been
you can't.
centralized through pools in Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is a little different
Yeah.
because you have, it's proof of work instead of proof of stake. So, but it is decentralized participation. Nobody can gatekeep you from being part of the network, and you can choose who you delegate your hash rate to if you're going to be part of a pool or something like that.
Man, and you can do smart contracts in Cardano, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Now I
That's
get it. Now I
Yeah,
understand it.
that's
Okay.
that's and there are people, there are significant projects making good headway on bridging between Bitcoin and Cardano because
Okay.
UTXO and
Who are those?
EUTX,
Yeah.
BTCOS is the name of the project.
Ah,
But yeah,
I
like
love.
I actually ran into Charles Hoskinson a couple of months ago here locally because he lives
Oh,
nearby,
interesting.
and
Oh,
at
that's funny.
a restaurant, and I saw him. I was like, I know that's Charles, and I last met him up in Vancouver in 2019 when I spoke at the conference up there, and so we
It's
talked for
hilarious.
just briefly, and he just had a meeting with those guys, and
Yeah.
so we discussed that a little bit, and I do think that those are the kind of things, like there are no networks about which I have no criticisms, right?
Yeah.
So I think you look for principles and things like, I do think interoperability between things like Bitcoin and a network like Cardano will be valuable for both. Um, Bitcoin could use a lot of the potential that Cardano offers functionally, and it should be very seamless to use.
Very interesting. Okay. Well, I'm gonna go get
But
a Cardano node running.
there's
Yeah.
the
Go for it.
here's a very interesting thing about Cardano, right? Is like it has what in the past year become an open governance protocol, right? So there are votes for decentralized representatives within the network.
Whoa.
There's voting
Whoa.
on all the different improvement protocols and things like this. So
Whoa.
like no longer does like it used to be IOHK held the keys to the
Whoa.
treasury and stuff, but no longer. It's now a decentralized, there's voting on the and representation and all that.
So
So
it's
it's
like the
it's
perfect archetype of a completely decentralized product with somebody who founded it, but no Satoshi to get all of his Satoshi gold, basically.
there's a lot of dynamics, and it's, I mean, again, lots of criticisms because a lot of the people
Yeah.
participating in it aren't oriented towards long-term, um,
Yeah.
what
That's the hard part about
the
blockchains.
broader
Trustless.
long-term
Yeah.
kind of benefit of the network.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know,
Interesting.
it does tend to be the case that when it's voluntary participation for representatives and it's, say, not paid positions, like the people doing it tend to be people who are
Yeah.
leveraging it for something or angling it or something like that, which you just have to be aware of the incentives and stuff like that. But on the positive side, it's highly transparent compared to traditional systems because, you know, people are still
Yeah.
signing,
Transparency.
you know, they're still signing transactions with from their wallet, and you know they're signaling in ways that you can't obfuscate. And you know, I do think that transparency is the only thing that affords accountability in representative governance situations. So transparency is a very positive aspect.
Speaking of which, we probably shouldn't get into this because I'm running out of steam after all the meetings I had today. But the private debt, private credit is billions of dollars, and they just tried to do a deal with Argentina to sneak in a private credit with all the big banks tried to like finagle the deal going on between the U.S. and actually the U.S. Treasury is standing up for not putting it on the taxpayers, but the banks are trying to get the U.S. taxpayers to be on the hook in case Argentina defaulted on their just like talk about not transparency, and it's just like a few guys in a room who are doing these deals, and it's just like, man, it's so crazy, it's so insane that that's where we are right now. But all these technologies are here,
I mean, I think
like able to do these things. Yeah,
a few guys in a room have traditionally been the ones mostly swaying things at scale.
yeah, for a long time.
So that's not necessarily changed, but the scope of
Yeah,
the impact can be
yeah,
more
interesting.
radical at this point, especially depending on who the few people are in what room. But yeah, I mean, as far as I know right now, it's been a pretty successful trade for the Treasury, because pesos rebounded today, right?
Yep.
So
Yeah. No, they bought it in a good time, but that's because Basant was the same guy who did
the
the
same guy
Bank
who
of
crashed
London. Yeah,
the
yeah,
pound, so you know,
yeah,
experience. I mean, they're all
yeah.
just leverage hedge bets, right? And stuff like that. And so
But with the ability to mold the political system so that the bet turns out right. As yeah,
you know, I probably wouldn't make it otherwise, um, presumably,
interesting.
because it
Yeah,
was a pretty sizable, what was it, 20 billion or something
20
like
billion.
that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
20 billion. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there's so many interesting games afoot, and I mean, the private credit markets are under what scrutiny already. Um, I
Are they
saw an
legal?
article,
DOJ is going after them.
no, this was a British organization looking at, maybe
Oh,
even the
interesting.
Bank of England was talking about it, but
Cool.
like, you know,
Interesting.
there's a lot of stress fractures in a lot of different places in the financial
Yeah.
sector. So
Yeah.
I don't know. What our mutual friend Christian on Twitter and I were
Yeah.
discussing this a little bit yesterday, and it's just like the capacity, like the the thing that continually surprises me is that the can has so much, is so robust, and there are so many people willing to keep kicking it, right? Like that's not
Yeah.
surprising, but what's
Yeah.
continually surprising me is that the can is holding up still, right? Because it's been like since 2008, I've been just
Yeah.
anticipating things are going to
Yeah.
unwind at some point, and you know, we keep just kind of reaching new levels of abstraction and a different capacity to, I don't know, what would be the right term?
Well,
Like I like to think about it as like basically borrowing from the future, right? Like
yeah.
when you're just producing this kind of unsecured debt that, you know, it's pulling something forward from the future to fund something now.
Yeah,
And the bet
interesting.
generally is that there's going to be some kind of exponential technological innovation produced by that that'll justify it and compensate the system, right, for that exposure. I'm not sure that's
But
a
that's
good bet to make. Um, I don't think that's necessarily sustainable, but it's also the case, I think, that it produces an environment that doesn't select for the kind of things that might actually do that.
yeah.
You know, that there, it creates these distortions, maybe tie all the way back to the beginning, right? Like the potential of what we think can be is very much constrained by what is being already
Interesting.
and how we perceive, you know, the rails to be laid, right? Like where the path goes, like the tendency is not to diverge far to either side, right? Like, you know, you're especially in pursuit of specific technologies, right? They kind of hone in on a consensus about where it's going and how it works. You could see this in something like or academic research, right? Like say quantum string theory for 30, 40 years, right? Just kind of like a narrowing in adherence to something that hasn't produced a lot of pragmatic, practical
Mm,
utility, right? And
uh,
and you could argue that like that's had a really negative effect on the potential for the field to be exploring other things that might actually work, right?
yeah. Yeah.
So, you know, if people get bound by a framework and a perspective that says this can be and these things can't be, then you won't find those things that you think can't be, even if they're actually there. You know,
It's the hardest
that's the
part
way our
about
kind of
reality.
that's the way our attention and our perspective works. It's like the Easter eggs
Yeah.
that can be right out in the
Yeah.
open, you
Yeah.
know, because you're not
Yeah.
looking for the thing that's in the open or maybe has something like a an intuitive explanation,
Yeah.
right? That doesn't have sort of the formalized rigid, say, mathematical descriptions or something, but actually does a better job of describing the way things work in ways you can use, maybe has some predictive capacities. Like those things are really useful. Um, but it's, you know, it seems like it takes a lot of imagination for us to discover those things. Like Michael Levin's work, I think, is directly down this line,
Oh, we didn't
right?
even
Like
talk about Michael Levin. Yeah.
if you start to engage with that, really engage with it, you have to open up your imagination
Yeah.
because
Interesting.
it's pointing beyond the constraints and even the mechanisms that we've seen as fundamental, really, in things like genetics, right, and biology.
Mm,
So, you know, we live in a biological substrate. So, like the way that those systems are working is really significant for our understanding of the
mm,
world. And the things that he's proposing are like opening up a whole nother layer or maybe multiple layers of discovery in how we think these things are working. Um, you know, what are the
mm,
hierarchies of things like goal directedness within organisms and um, you know, how do you get collective consensus amongst disparate things that seem to have relatively no processing or autonomy capacity, right? And yet, you know, liver cells are being replaced by liver cells, and if all's going well, they're not contending with
mm,
stomach cells, right? They're actually all doing their jobs and they're different, but it's working, pointed towards a higher level order, right? An organism that's the body, right? And so these things are, we're just kind of breaking them down at scale, but some of the mechanisms that we've perceived as, I think, like the fundamental levels of interaction or relationship aren't as fundamental as we supposed.
yeah. Oh man, the Michael Levin thing. It's hard not to go down that rabbit hole. Final question: what have you learned about the? What is your take on that podcast between John Vervaeke, Michael Levin, and Pajot? Like, what did you learn from that in terms of what these experiments they're doing with the Planadians or planarian worms and such? Like, about biology? What did you learn about this substrate?
So I think that the first time I encountered Michael Levin was probably 4 or 5 years ago. I saw a clip of him on Lex's podcast, and it was just an intro, 5 minutes or something like that, and it just blew my mind, right? Just like instant. It was one of those things that like instantly caught my relevance realization because it just it resonated across so many different points at different levels, right? Like I felt like this ties into many different things, like not just functionally within biology, but maybe even as like abstract frameworks of thinking about things, right? Like, so I started following his work then. And, him and his group put out quite a bit of, I mean, they do a lot of research and they put out a few papers a year.
Training AI
So
on that. Yeah.
I've been following along with that. So that conversation, in particular, he's addressing one of the most recent papers that they put out, which, is what on the mechanisms of these biological distributions of patterns, right? Through what bioelectric signal communication protocols, something like that, and their capacity to tweak those patterns and produce different organisms, right? Without affecting genetic structure at all. So, it just to begin to engage with that, like I said, like it takes so much imagination to just be like, wow, this thing, what is happening, right? Like, how is it happening? And like, what does that mean that kind of thing can happen? And so I very much draw these things as well into my perspective, theologically, right? And really practically into like trying to understand my perspective of all of those kind of ideas too, right? Because I think one of the things that I see often, especially in the New Testament, is and I think mostly in the words of Christ, right, are references to things that's maybe we've never been seeing because we're not looking for them at all, right? And so we take the words and we contextualize them in the best frames we can, and those have actually been the things we tend to find contention over time, right? Is like how we define things, and even maybe a difference between the Greek and the early Latin perspectives often maybe was really grounded in differences in the languages, right? That really don't convey the same ideas the same way. And so you end up with different idea systems. And maybe they're even different reactions to different phenomenological perspectives of the world, because language kind of has that capacity too, I think. So, we're well down a trail of schisms of people breaking apart over propositionals. And that's produced a lot of people in a lot of different places, right? Which, if you can kind of appreciate that, I think can teach us something, right? Because there's, it's not like a lot of, like we have a lot of mono ideal structures, really, right? Like people aren't highly cohesive within even any of, say, the traditional institutional systems. There tends to be a decent amount of variety. Like, for one thing, we're exposed to a different phenomenological world with technology today, right? Like you're just being like, if you're experiencing the world, you're being compelled by the world about how the world is. If the framework that you have for thinking about the world is from 1,500 years ago, if it doesn't match, I don't think you should either toss it or try to force it into the present, right? I think it's something more like a lens. And what we've created now, especially after the diffusion of Protestantism, is like fractal lenses all over of different perspectives
Schisms
of
within
reality.
people. Yeah.
I mean, it's almost broken our total cohesion, and it's not.
So yeah,
That,
but yeah, our
we might open
cohesion
more
and this
bundles of worms
yeah,
here.
because China doesn't have China got hit with the Cultural Revolution, but so that kind of did shatter their cohesion, but all at once and not at the genetic level. Whereas it's been a long draw for Western civilization getting fractured to the degree it's fractured. But that might be a good thing where we're headed. Like
Well,
it might be.
I tend to think, and this is, if you frame it in one way, it tends to be very cynical and negative, right? It's like,
Yeah.
I don't think that we can engineer systems to solve the problems that we have in the world.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of a negative kind of approach in a sense. What I do think though is that the model is something like we can operate in a posture with good faith towards others, right? Which is an expression of faith. And that if we do that, like it can afford the potential of a transformation that we can't engineer, right? Because
I like that.
you actually need a perspectival shift.
Yeah.
Because I really think fundamentally, this framework of, say, scarcity versus abundance as the fundamental reality. All of our systems are predicated on scarcity. Our monetary systems, our perspectives of value, our perspective of time fundamentally, right? Like definitely scarce resource value, right? And so, we perceive all of our value in a cascading kind of way from the scarcity of that, whatever it is, right? Like the more scarce it is to us, or the more difficult to acquire or whatever, like the more valuable it becomes.
Yeah,
in a
interesting.
sense. And I mean, for a long time, we've used that kind of base understanding to underlie our financial systems, right? Gold, scarcity, value, it has utility, these kinds of properties and these kinds of things, right? But like fundamentally, what determines the cost or the value is how much of it there is and how readily available it is. And demand, right? Supply demand, fundamentally. So we don't know how to operate in a world that is abundant fundamentally. Although, I think we have a glimpse of a vestige of the deep past where that was the case in the Garden of Eden.
Jungle.
Well, I think the Garden of Eden is actually that picture, right? Because the thing that doesn't exist there is scarcity, like even for time. Right? Death is not a part of this. Like, but what also doesn't, like, all the information is much lower resolution because there isn't anything like novelty or contention.
Yeah.
And so, the introduction of novelty and say something like conscious awareness and choice, right? Leads to, maybe we don't even know how many thousands of years of whatever the paradigm is you want to call that we live in today. But like there are promises along the line of reconciliation and a transformation back to a different kind of fundamental perspective.
Did Jesus say that he's going to transform back to the Garden of Eden?
Well, it says the kingdom of heaven, right? It says the earth is transformed into the kingdom of heaven. And I mean, theologically, people go in different directions on that. Yeah. But, personally, I think it's most compelling to perceive it as actually the earth is transformed. And from something like a quantum perspective and attention, I don't think that's unreasonable at all.
You can't engineer it. I think that's why you had talked about the second coming is like, it's like that's the only thing that works, and not the second coming in the revelation sense of like apocalypse or anything like that. But that's like our institutional structures, I believe, are already at that point where it is already apocalypse in the nation state institutional sense. Like it's already happened.
Yeah,
it's going away.
I think that's pretty fair to say. If it's not complete, it's at least in progress. Yeah. And I think good evidence of that is just the amount of fear people tend to feel and express And,
Yeah. Yeah.
oftentimes it expresses as anger or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, there's a real tendency towards resentment, right? Which is really negative. Like it's easy for people of our kind of age to point towards the preceding generations and blame them for raping the earth and pillaging and plundering our futures.
Yeah.
That's not all that, like, that's not that constructive either. Like, it's worth recognizing, like, maybe where directionally some of those things were pretty far off, maybe even diabolical. But, let's not just blame everyone, or like, that's for one thing, it's never everyone. It was mostly a few people. And
it's the same guys in the room that we're talking about. No, but even
And I mean, hey, to be fair, the entire generation of people was under psychological warfare.
Yeah,
I mean, we have been since the 40s, so as far as I can tell, maybe before. But
before that with the radio, I would say.
Yeah, just distribution has changed things and afforded different opportunities and potential for different kind of granularity and resolution in that kind of thing. So, there's a lot of things in play, and the path forward is not burning everything down. Although the Phoenix myth probably exists for a reason. And like, I just think I would love to. I could spend so much time trying to engineer solutions. Jordan Hall is a good kind of a good example of this, right? Like someone who's really genuinely poured a lot of time into analyzing the structural problems and going down different pathways to try to find maybe potentials for resolution. And very very interestingly, ends up in a church in North Carolina, right, in the foothills there, and like embracing Christianity as like, we're not going to just engineer our way out of this, and the
gotta love our way out of it.
And the answer is not just remove yourself from the situation as far as possible. Because that's a strong impulse as well. Like, I feel that all the time. I'd love to live by myself in the mountains somewhere, but
it was pretty good. It was pretty peaceful. It's hard to come back. I'm still going to bed at 8 p.m. with the sun.
That's where I was born, so there's a part of me that always wants to go, back to the mountains and the wilderness in a sense. But I don't think that's, we didn't touch on this at all, though I know you've mentioned it many times online recently. Like, there's our modern materialist framework, I think, tends to offer people two solutions in a sense, like nihilism or Gnosticism. You've been discussing Gnosticism quite a bit.
Yeah.
And, I don't think either one of those is the solution.
Yeah, interesting.
But I don't think that the materialist framework offers anything else. Especially with reductionist logic. So, this is a thing that has constrained the perspective, especially of the West, for 350 years, since the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution, and it's just kind of become more compelling as we've gone along. And I think that's actually the thing that we're kind of up against and contending with. And this is the meaning crisis fundamentally in a lot of ways, right? And this is the thing that we have to, like, it actually has to be transcended in a sense. Like, we don't just structurally organize it into the system in such a way that now it's integrated and it works.
Yeah. So the one thing from the Michael Levin thing is that vertical causation. They made one little comment and I saved it, and I was like, what the fuck does that mean? Vertical causation. Because they were talking about, I think it was Vervaeke himself, Vervaeke in that interview was obviously clearly challenged all the stuff he talked about in Awakening from the Meaning Crisis from the materialistic framework and the positivist and all the things that he comes from. He's very clearly started to come to some recognitions I think both of us come to as well. Just like, okay, well, that doesn't really explain it. And it feels like that vertical causation comment was about that, where it's like, this isn't being caused by a random entropy, emergent entropy. It's like there's something else at play, and that
There's
thing
a deeper
is
kind of goal directedness, right? Like
yeah,
actually the
yeah,
goal is coming from something deeper than we've even perceived at this point,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And I think the things we've been sharing recently of Stephen Wolfram's work, right? Like that
yeah,
points towards that too. He's posited computation as fundamental and now come to the understanding that like actually there has like an observer is required. And like, you know, the idea that there like the fact that there's God is not surprising. It's the fact that there are observers like us that's surprising. You know, like that's a quote, basically a quote statement from him. And like, it really surprised me, you know, because it's not been the way that he's, I think, been pursuing that. Like he's just kind of openly pursuing computation as a fundamental framework.
yeah, yeah,
And yet that's kind of the direction that it's leading. The implications are going directly there. That, you know, I think consciousness is the fundamental thing, and these other descriptors of reality are like right on top of that.
yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. And
Always a pleasure,
go
man.
find
5 times now.
Yeah.
Feels great.
the most. I think you just overtook Kapil Gupta as the most interviewed guest. Aaron Lowry on Twitter.
Honored.
AARON_LOWRY. Thank you so much.
Take care, man.